Hey there, Lionesses. This is Bobby Carlton. I'm the publisher and editor-in-chief of Lioness magazine. I'm also the founder of Innovation Women, an online speaker bureau for women. Today, we are talking with Casey Grage. She is the founder and CEO of Hubley Surgical. So Casey has basically co-invented a whole new way to put holes in your head. I thought you'd love that. We all need a few more holes in our head, right? So welcome, Casey. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I have to say, let's start off with a little bit of background on neurology and how you got involved in it. So tell me a little bit about you.
Sure. So I, like many, have kind of a long family history of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And so I've always been very interested in neurological diseases from a very young age, kind of going through that with my family. But then on top of, I guess, that humanitarian aspect of it, I just think the brain is really cool. So I was also very interested in it from a scientific perspective.
Right.
And so my background is in neuroscience. I also studied software engineering in college. And I had spent a couple years during university and even beforehand working in neurodegenerative research in neuroscience labs, studying to ultimately go through a PhD and become a neuroscience professor.
Right.
But when I was no problem. But when I was in university, I was interested in exploring whether I wanted to go into kind of more pharmaceutical therapeutic development or into the device side of things. And so I ended up enrolling in an MBA class in medical device entrepreneurship. And that's actually where Hubley started, was in that course.
Gotcha. All right. So why do some people need an extra hole in their head?
All sorts of reasons. So drilling a hole into the skull is the prerequisite for basically any neurosurgical procedure, anytime you need to access the brain in some way. In emergencies, this can be for stroke, hemorrhage, ruptured aneurysm, traumatic brain injury. And in elective procedures, it can be if you're putting in deep brain electrodes for epilepsy. There's certain therapies for Parkinson's disease, which require inserting either electrodes or drugs into the brain. You can deliver chemotherapy directly into the brain. You can put laser interstitial thermal laser ablation therapy into brain tumors. I mean, just any kind of neurosurgery you can think of, most likely it starts with drilling a hole through the skull.
Gotcha. All right. So tell us about the Hubley drilling system and why it exists.
So today, the way that holes are drilled into the skull in emergencies, the first host of reasons I listed, if there's some kind of time constraint, the current standard of care is a hand cranked drill. And I actually, should have told this out before, but I have one I can show you. All right. Sorry, I should have gotten that ready. So this is a hand crank drill. This is from Northwestern Hospital in Chicago. This is the current standard of care for drilling a hole into the skull in emergencies. As you can see, there's no methods for guidance or stopping, which means that there's nothing to prevent the drill from plunging into brain tissue or being drilled at the wrong angle. It's two-handed, it's wobbly. Frankly, it's very antiquated for 2022. So we invented the Hubley drilling system to be not only battery powered to allow for a one-handed procedure, but it also stops automatically once it breaks through the skull. So here's what it looks like. Pretty simple. It has, or very straightforward. It has an LED monitor on the back to indicate the level of force at which you're drilling. And then it has a sensor which stops automatically when it breaks the skull. And so that prevents accidental plunge into brain tissue.
Wow. All right. I have to admit that first drill that you pulled out looks like something I would use on a piece of wood.
Yes.
Not too dissimilar.
Not actually. This is a Fiskars. It's the same thing as a Fiskars drill, which they sell at Home Depot. Except this
Great.
one is much more expensive because it's FDA cleared.
Gotcha. All right. So tell me a little bit about your company and your team. How did you get connected with other members of your team?
Sure. So as I mentioned, we started out of that MBA class at Northwestern. So it was in that course that I met a neurosurgeon named Dr. Ahmed Air, and he founded this company with me at the beginning. I had been aware of this procedure and I had been aware of the antiquity in neurosurgery. Ahmed was the one who brought this home from the hospital and said, this is what I think we need to change first. So at first it was just Ahmed and me. That was back in 2018 when we came up with the idea. After doing some pitch competitions, filing our provisional patent, I went full time in December of 2019. And it was right around that time, in the first couple months, that Ahmed's protege, Nikhil, another neurosurgeon, he joined. And then I also hired my CTO, Tyler, full time. And we had known him through the professor of that MBA class. So in other words, the very, very small world, which is Chicagoland medical device entrepreneurship.
That's amazing. All right. So medical devices, you mentioned a little bit earlier that the first drill you were showing, FDA approval. Medical devices go through this whole rigorous process for approval. Where are you today with that?
So we are a class 2 510K device. That's our regulatory pathway. This means that we have to submit a 510K proposal, which we have already done as of about 2 weeks ago. So we've just submitted our 510K proposal, and it's an average turnaround time to FDA clearance of about 3 to 6 months. So we've heard back from the FDA that their anticipated time to clearance is November 9th. However, given FDA delays, especially kind of reeling from COVID, it could go into Q1 of next year. But regardless, it's happening soon. And then once we're FDA cleared, we're good to market and sell and launch.
So FDA approval, obviously a super long road. How are you funding the company before you can actually sell products?
Through grants, pitch competitions, and investors. And actually, investors more than anything else. We've had kind of small LPs, angel groups, and individual angels who have funded us over the last couple of years. We've raised about $1.3 million in dilutive capital, and we've raised an additional like $300,000 to $400,000 in government grants and non-dilutive pitch competitions.
Great. All right. So you currently have this small dedicated team.
Yep.
With obviously approval will come the need to grow quickly. Let's talk a little bit about your startup hiring process.
Sure. I get advice from everyone that we possibly can. So far we have 5 full-time employees. 3 of those were well, I guess I shouldn't include myself, but basically 2 of those were people that we already knew very well, and so the hiring process was easy. They were former colleagues of other team members, and so that was easy. The other 2 roles that we actually did a whole hiring process for, it was, of course, multiple interviews with myself and other team members, and then the big kind of hurrah that I do before I hire each of them has been asking them, depending on their role, to prepare a 10-minute PowerPoint presentation, half of which is their career to date, which is, what led them to Hubley and why they would do a good job with us. And then the other 5 minutes of the presentation is kind of a fun scenario. It's 3 years down the line. What's the ideal situation for where Hubley is at and how you've led to this success? And what I've done is I've had a Zoom call where I've invited every single one of our investors, advisors, mentors, team members, professors, and I have an hour-long Zoom where that candidate gives that 10-minute presentation and then 50 minutes of Q&A with all 60 so people that are on the call. So it's kind of a high pressure situation, but I think it's worked really, really well to not only learn more about the candidate, but give the candidate an idea of who's involved in the Hubley community and the kind of advice that we have access to. Nice.
So speaking of advice, what kind of advice do you have for other entrepreneurs?
It's kind of circular here, but I would say my greatest strength is basically knowing what I don't know, and being able to find people that I really trust. And so every time I need to make a large decision, I go through, again, my network of, as I said, advisors, investors, professors, and I say, here's the decision I have to make. What are the pros and cons? What do I need to think through? And I try to get at least 3 different people's advice, people from different backgrounds. Then I just kind of weigh what they say, and use that to move forward. And so again, hiring is a great example of that, of taking in a bunch of different input and deciding, okay, this person has more experience with this specific problem. And so I'm going to weigh their advice more heavily, or vice versa.
So Casey, just before we started recording, you mentioned you were just back from Chile. What were you doing there?
Thank you. Thanks for asking. So for a little bit of background, our company got a grant from the Chilean government back in 2020 through their economic development department in order to basically do work with neurosurgeons there. And so this has been kind of a project that's 2 years in the making, but we are now at the point where we are gearing up for our very first inpatient pilots at Hospital Carlos Van Buren in Valparaiso, Chile. And so I had previously spent 2 months in Chile back in 2021, kind of solidifying these relationships and understanding the hospital system there, which turns out is very similar to the US, which is part of why it's a great test site for us. But then this past week, I just got back yesterday. I brought a couple of Hubley drills, not for human use, and I did training with all the neurosurgeons at Hospital Carlos Van Buren. They have a pretty big department of about 25 neurosurgeons. We did training in cadavers and model skulls, and are kind of preparing for our inpatient pilots. And we've already gone through regulatory approvals there, and these trials should be kicking off next month.
Oh, that's exciting. And actually, you just mentioned you've got approval already there.
In Chile, yes.
In Chile. So it must be a different process than
it
in
is.
the US?
It's yes, it is. It's much it's much faster than in the US.
No. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, folks, we've been talking today with Casey Grage. She is the founder and CEO of Hubley Surgical. And good luck on that FDA approval.
Thank you so much.